Well, thank you. Thank you for coming. Thanks for coming on Zoom. Thanks to Michael for setting this up. So, it's a treat. People ask me why I speak about this, because I'm always saying it's pointless to speak about it. It's because it's a pleasure. It's a joy. Michael says, speak louder. Can you hear me okay? No, not loud enough.
Yeah, if you can
We could turn so I'm closer to the microphone.
Put him on that
Maybe
side.
you should sit over there.
What do you think?
We
But
just
then
all-
I'll have my back to the.
Yeah. Or you can scoot your chair. Why don't you come? You can,
Oh, I can move forward a bit. Shall I do that?
Yeah, we can move backward.
Yeah, do that. I wouldn't want.
You don't have an external mic that you can plug in?
oh,
Oh,
This is pretty sensitive.
I can,
I think that'll
It's
help.
pretty
I'll
good
use my
now.
teacher voice.
Is it-
Yeah.
Yeah, use your teacher voice. What does that say?
Yeah,
Thanks,
okay.
Tim. They said thanks, Tim.
I'll imagine that your students or disciples. Yeah, okay. I'll go back in time. Somebody said to me the other day that I'm a teacher. Doesn't feel like teaching, talking about this at all. Not one bit. I remember what teaching feels like. You've got an agenda. You've got knowledge to impart. You need to test the students to see if you've imparted it. Otherwise, you can be well, it's all about whether you're a good teacher. That is, the students have understood. Of course, there's none of that. There's none of it at all. There's nothing to be understood about this. And yet, it's totally inclusive of all understanding. Because it can sound, and it sounded to me like this message negates understanding and negates knowledge. Not in any way at all. It kind of just, you could say, just puts it in its place, which is it's relative. It can be useful, relatively, but that's all. But in this, understanding is utterly redundant. And yet understanding still seems to happen or not. But it's irrelevant whether, it just doesn't matter whether you understand. But it does to the one who really wants to understand. It mattered a lot to me. Hence, I had a very large library to help me understand. I was obsessed with YouTube videos to help me understand. And all that seems to have happened is that was simply and very obviously, undoubtedly, worthless. All of it. Every shred of understanding that you have accumulated, I have great pleasure in saying this, by the way, is utterly worthless in this understanding that there can be no understanding. And that, again, undoubtedly feels like love. There is nothing more loving than understanding is worthless. It's of no value. Absolutely no value. Relative value. That is unconditional love. That complete redundancy of knowledge. I've just been to Jiddu's house and I bought the book for Kate, Freedom from the Known. I couldn't read the book. I still loved the title. I couldn't get more than 2 pages and I can't read that. Because it's so intellectual. But that's what's being spoken of. There is a freedom from the known. And yet knowledge isn't lost. I thought I would have to lose knowledge in order to be free from the known, but there is only already freedom, which is inclusive of all knowledge, but without the power, the weight, and the significance that knowledge has. Doesn't mean shit. And that feels like love. So you can still be interested in those people who have knowledge about subjects that you're interested in, but not in the way that it fuels your desire to be in the place that they're in. It's very obvious that there is no place. You can't, whatever aspirations, whoever you've admired, whoever you've looked up to, and you've dreamt that you could be in their place or in a place similar to them, it's all nonsense. This is utterly alone. There is no possibility of being in another place. Not even in the place that you said you're in, where you're at, where you're coming from. This isn't coming from anywhere or going anywhere. It's not even where it is. So it is a pleasure to share this with the few who resonate with it, who like to hear it, who can hear it. You probably try to talk to people about this, because, and by the way, there's no restriction on talking about this, but there is a great restriction on those who can hear it, it seems. And I wouldn't advise you talking to anyone about it unless someone shows interest in it, because it can't be heard unless it can be heard. And then if it can be heard, it's doubtlessly heard. Don't know what's hearing. There's no knowing of that at all. But it's undeniable. So it is a joy to be able to do this and for you to come. It just feels like sharing it. It's not of any value, because love isn't of any value. We weren't taught that love is worthless. That's why it's love. Quite the opposite. We were all conditioned, quite the contrary, that love is utterly conditional. And of greatest worth. And it's hilarious, but there is a tragic element to it as well. That you see the virtually all human beings in agony in the pursuit of love. And yet it's all that there is. And isn't. There isn't a thing called love. Everything is love. Everything isn't love. There is no love. There's only love. It won't make sense. And yet that not making sense makes perfect sense. All of this is utterly paradoxical. I haven't got it. I haven't come to an understanding. It feels, the more I speak about this, the more obvious the not knowing is. maybe that's what Judy was talking about. It's utterly undoubted. The uncertainty. There's no certainty here at all. And yet it's utterly undoubtable. And so you're every individual person, every human being seems attracted to certain words that seem to resonate as a word for this. I haven't found any really. I say this just because it's the most innocuous it feels. It's the least it's the least loaded, it's the least it's the least contentious, but don't think it's not contentious because people contend with me regularly that what do you mean by this? If it's this, it's not that. It's just simply that there's no it can sound also, if you speak about this, it can only, for most people who hear it, it can only sound as though I found what I'm speaking about. That's not true. I haven't found anything. I talk about the peace that passes all understanding, but I haven't found that. You won't find that. It's just apparent. It just is. This is always as it is. And of course, that's utterly at peace. I don't mean the appearance of peace. You can't say what the peace is. It's just simply at rest. Maybe the closest is to say that everything is empty. But again, it may sound that I've found emptiness. But of course, there's nothing to find. You won't find emptiness. You will only ever find things. And all the things are empty. They're nothing. So another way of talking about this is futility. The futility of looking for what is. Of course, it already is. So it's hilarious, but tragic. Tragic for the one who tried so hard, I mean, desperately, to the point of utter despair, that I can't find what I'm looking for. I've listened to so many speakers who have told me that there's this. And it's not even that it's masked in the looking for it. I've heard that quite often. You know, the seeking seems to veil what is. While you're looking for what is, you will not find what is. No. The seeking for it is equally what is. There are no exceptions. And maybe you've been waiting until you're no one, you know, ego death, whether you've imagined that might appear, or that won't appear. There's no ego to die. There's no self to die. There is no death. There's no one to die. There's just this aliveness, which is equally dead. Death isn't somewhere else. You won't find death any more than you'll find life. This whole fantasy that you'll know the difference. Well, the fantasy comes from the sense of I know I am alive, and so I'm afraid I won't be. because I know I am alive, then I will know I'm dead. I can't, self can't really imagine any other. But again, I can't tell you how it's obvious, but it's so obvious that this is all, that of course this is death. Death can't be anywhere else. There isn't anywhere else. There's nowhere else for anything. Anything. Even nothing. Nothing can't be somewhere else. This is all. This is utterly complete. There's no outside or inside. There's nothing hidden. So in a way, it's probably, for self, this would be the absolute disappointment. Devastatingly disappointing. It's not what I wanted. Because what I wanted was what I imagined could be. Well, there is nothing that could be. There's no way this could be. It's just the way it is. I mean, it's so outrageously simple, but it is devastating because it does kill any fantasy of, well, it kills all ambition. Any fancy of attainment, of achievement, of becoming. There's no becoming. There's not only no one to become, there is no becoming. This doesn't become anything other than it is. So it won't help your career or your relationships or your spiritual attainment or any other kind of. It won't help anything. Nothing requires any help. There can still be helping, seeming helping. Probably more so, but not necessarily. The innocence of everything is astounding. And innocence isn't the right word because it sounds like the absence of guilt. So, but there's no innocence or guilt. So innocence isn't the right word, but there's no fault. There's nothing at fault. And that is liberating, but not as liberating as the impossibility of anything being right. So the impossibility of anything being wrong is what self often did. That's what I desired. But incredibly, it's much more liberating that there's no possibility of anything being right. Everything is utterly neutral, including all my judgments of it's not right and wrong. They're utterly neutral as well. So that's why I mean when I say innocence, it's not accurate, but it's the best we've got in language to say that every human being, and not just human beings, everything is innocent. As I say, that doesn't mean there won't be judgments. Well, the judgments are innocent. It's beautiful. You won't be perfected. There's no perfection.
What, you mean
Perf-
waking up won't make you perfect?
I'm sorry.
It's a big disappointment, I gotta say.
No. But when I say this is absolute disappointment. No. No, whoever you imagined is perfect. They'll hit the dirt. Yeah, face down in the dirt. Yeah, everything laid flat. No hierarchy whatsoever. I don't just mean with human beings, I mean in fantasy too, you know. All fantasies are, you could say then, you know, imagination and fantasy is liberated too. Means nothing. But it does feel like love. That it couldn't be any other way. There is no way. There's no way it could be any other way. Feels like love. And that doesn't mean I like it. Don't think you're going to like everything. You're not going to be happy with everything. Opinions will remain the same. You just won't give a shit about them. You know, I'm happy to give you my opinion on it, on any subject. And it pretty much will be the opinion that it just doesn't mean anything. Because opinions only matter to me. I'm so attached to. And of course, the most profound, the most powerful opinions are belief. You know, they're the opinions. Really, they're only opinions. But we call them belief or we call them faith. And they're sacred.
The hardest ones to leave behind.
Well, you won't leave them behind. That's the wonder. Nothing is left behind when everything is left behind. There is nothing to be left behind. I mean, whatever you try to do, you know, our thoughts are the problem, beliefs are the problem, feelings are the problem, attachments the problem. Whatever other spiritual shit that you know, how hard you've worked at that bullshit. It's just such a dreadful curse that is always leading away from all there is. That's all. And of course, it's not leading away, but it feels as though it is. It's not. I mean, that too is liberated. It's not that you look at others and go, oh, you poor wretch with your, you know, it's not a position of superiority where you look down on the others who have their silly beliefs. Not at all. Because it couldn't be otherwise. And it couldn't be otherwise simply because there isn't otherwise. It's just outrageously simple. Far too simple. So it feels like loss. It felt like loss to me. It felt like the loss of everything. Until seemingly everything was lost. And then it was incredibly obvious that nothing had been lost, could be lost. There's only loss. This is always being lost and found. And there's no in between lost and found. This is birth and death, with no space between those. This space where I say I live is this imagined space between birth and death. And of course, that story still remains. I can tell the story still. But it is just as so obviously a story. It's not actually how this is. This doesn't have a beginning or an end. So if this is the beginning and the end, there is no beginning or end. Which is just another way of saying, you won't know. I don't know. Where's the beginning? You've never found a beginning. No one has. No one's found an ending. We just tell stories to each other about beginnings and endings. And in stories have to have a beginning and an ending. Otherwise, they're not a story. And they have to have a space between where the story happens.
All time. So-called.
Yeah. And it sounds like a big deal. I mean, you say to most people that time doesn't exist. I mean, people would go crazy. You know, that's not quite as bad as saying you don't exist, but almost. You know, that's nearly as threatening, the absence of time, because where will I live? It's because they're not two, really. They're not two separate ideas. The whole notion that I am, there has to be time for existence to happen in time. I exist for a period, for a time span. And events happen in time, but there really aren't any events. Not even one. There isn't even one happening. If there's anything anyone on the Zoom wants to ask, then
Oh, yeah.
just write it in the chat.
Yeah, if anybody has a question for Tim, go ahead and put it in the chat and I'll read it to him. So I have one while we're waiting.
Yeah.
In Copenhagen, you made a comment that I really liked. Maybe you could talk about it. Feelings are not dangerous.
They are to me, though. Feelings feel very threatening to when they're mine and what they say about me. And I remember feeling really powerfully, if I allowed the sadness, the sorrow, if I allowed it fully, it would utterly consume me, and the tears would never stop. I remember I said that to him, and that would just be enough to keep it down. And there was a real terror that sadness particularly would utterly consume me. And by consume me, I felt that the sorrow would be too much for me to stand. I wouldn't be able to stand the feeling. And then against my wishes, against my will, the sorrow was found. And of course, there's stories around sorrow, but sorrow is an essential. I mean, it's so human, because this is always whatever you've held on to is always a pretense that it hasn't already been lost. Whatever it is, it can be anything. A relationship, mostly for me, it was around relationship, but it could be anything, you know. Loss of innocence, loss of youth, loss of, loss of self-esteem, loss of just loss. And there's great sorrow, and I think is what the mechanism of self seems to be. Predominantly it was a protection against that. Not just sorrow, and I prefer the word sorrow to sadness. It feels more accurate to talk about it as sorrow. And then this incredible revelation that sorrow is love was only apparent, was only obvious when sorrow, you could say, engulfed me. That's how it felt, like a wave that drowned in it. And I thought I was dying. And self is very afraid of that. Because sorrow, I was, like most of us, we're very conditioned as children that sorrow is something that indicates something is wrong. You've made an error. It upsets it upsets the adults as children. Oh, darling, don't cry. Mummy will be upset if you cry. Don't cry. No, and I think boys tend to get this indoctrination very heavily, but girls do as well. And I think nearly every human being is walking around with this massive stored up energy of grief, of sorrow, this deep sadness that feels, because it's been repressed so long, you can't even name it. You wouldn't even call it sadness or sorrow. It just comes up as fear because it's been so pushed down. Because I'll be rejected if I'm felt that. If I feel fully this sorrow, not only will I be rejected by the others that I rely on, it will consume me and I won't be able to stand it. Really, there is nothing to fear. There is nothing to fear in fear, because fear of fear is very profound for self as well. That fear indicates that I'm in mortal danger. Neurotic fear. I don't mean fear of a truck coming and hitting you. I mean the fear that most adults feel. Feeling, this isn't liberation from feeling. It's absolutely the opposite. It's liberation for feeling, which is being human. Really, what thought has done, you could call self-thought. What thought has done is made feeling wrong, made feeling the enemy, made feeling dangerous. It is not dangerous. Feeling is being human. And somehow, I have no idea how, it can be very obvious that all feeling is love. Love is love. Anger is love. Sadness is love. Even the ones that are really, all the mortal sins. Jealousy is love. Envy is love. All the things we've been taught that are, that you need to rid yourself of these, especially if you've been brought up Christian. But pretty much all cultures don't differ that much. There's a way that I can be, which is right, and most of the feelings are wrong. So we make what self does, what thought does, is make most of what we call being human wrong. It's dreadful. It's just the most awful curse. So it feels compassionate and it feels loving to say to anyone who would listen, like you poor bastard, and who would listen, to say that feelings aren't dangerous. That isn't to say that they won't feel dangerous, but there's no danger in feeling that they're dangerous. That's okay. No one is at risk. Why? Because there is no one at risk. This being human is the totality. There isn't anything else. What are you saving yourself from? What are you saving yourself for? For what? There's never going to be anything better. There's nothing worth saving yourself for.
No sense of survival though wrapped up in that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because feeling, so what self does is you have this neurotic fear for myself, and it feels exactly like a tiger attacking you.
Yes.
It's fucking not at all. There aren't any tigers in LA.
It's just people.
Yeah, I know, or a guy with a gun. There aren't those. That's the equivalent of it. That's the equivalent of a tiger in LA. Is a guy with a gun.
But we've kind of given this idea that everybody's potentially dangerous,
Mhm.
life threatening.
Yeah. Which is, I mean, that's true. I mean, I'm not pretending that's not true. There is no security. I'm not talking about feeling more secure at all. I could say quite the contrary. There's no security in this. This is totally wild. This is the jungle, the concrete one, but it is the jungle. They're just, but it feels much more like being an animal in the jungle. And of course, mostly, most of the animals are living quite harmoniously in the jungle. There isn't danger all the time. There's only danger when there's danger. But what self does is, because I am the vigilance against danger, I'm always on alert. So underlying is this constant underlying nagging fear of, I have to be aware, I have to be aware. There's danger around it, which you might say is helpful. Self would say, well, that's what kept me, that's why I'm still here. Without that, I wouldn't be here now. You know, self's very good at convincing itself that it's a necessity. It's not. It's freaking no. That won't keep you safe. Again, so paradoxical. No safety. The impossibility of security is the liberation. That's the peace that passes all understanding. There is no possibility of safety. There's no desire to keep safe. Who's keeping? I don't mean practically. You're not going to, because somebody will say to me, oh, you just walk out in front of a truck then. No, don't be stupid. I'm an intelligent animal. I don't do that. You don't need you to not walk out in front of a truck. But me claims everything. I claim I'm keeping all of this shit show together. And without me, it would all collapse. It's pure arrogance. There's no one keeping anything together. But I'm so afraid that, I mean, I have to keep making this effort. Otherwise, it would all. So the wonder is, and the peace that passes all understanding is, wow, you're never doing anything. And there's no necessity. That's the wonder. The wonder is that not only did you never do anything, and all your past life is redundant, you know, all of that. I never needed to do any of that. But this has no requirement. Life doesn't recognize you. There's only you recognize you. No one else. No other human being recognizes you. They recognize a face, and then they say they know you. No one knows you. No one's ever known you. No one could ever know you. There's no you to know. You're the only one who says, I am known, I could be known, I wish to be known, I long to be known. I long to be connected with another, which means I know you and you know me. Well, that's that is literally blown out of the water. There's no possibility of knowing another. There are no others. Without you, you are the illusion. I am is the illusion that you are. So the aloneness can feel very overwhelming because it's undeniable. I am the denial of being because there are others. But this is a complete, the completeness is the aloneness. That's not what self ever wants. Maybe a few introverts who like the aloneness. I don't know if you've noticed, but I'm an extrovert.
No.
You wouldn't guess. So that was terrifying. When the aloneness was undoubted, it was undeniable, and I couldn't escape. There was no recourse to pretense anymore. I couldn't pretend that I'd ever known anyone else, including myself. Because of course self makes self another. It's a funny old game, this self game. But I know myself, well, there's two straight away. Who knows who? So it's like when the game is up, it can feel utterly devastating because it can feel like you lose every relationship. In an absolute sense, that's true. There is no relationship. This isn't in relation to anything else. There isn't anything else to be in relationship to. So it feels devastating, and yet relationships feel more intimate. This is great, wonderfully paradoxical. Without me, there's more intimacy. How the fuck can that be true? It kind of can't. To self, that can't be true, because I'm the one who's in relationship, and I'm the one who can be intimate with another. But of course, everything is intimate. There's an intimacy that is incredibly ordinary, and it's not available. It just is. It's not available to you or me. It just is. This is total intimacy. No.